I'm Diane Macedo. Thanks for streaming with us. Concerns are growing for Ukraine's nuclear power plants. Ukrainian authorities say the Chernobyl power plant, now under Russian control, has been knocked off its power grid and is running on emergency generators. The Ukrainians say the outage could put cooling systems at risk. Renewed evacuation efforts are underway across Ukraine today in response to another ceasefire agreement aimed at allowing civilians to escape. Ukrainian President Vladimir Zelensky issued a new message this morning, again urging the West to send Russian-made warplanes from Poland to Ukraine. Polish leaders have agreed to send the jets to a U.S. NATO airbase in Germany, but the Pentagon so far has rejected the proposal over the risk it could expand the war beyond Ukraine. Vice President Kamala Harris is headed to Poland herself to meet with key European allies about the war. The trip comes after congressional leaders from both parties reached a deal to send more than $13 billion in aid to help Ukraine. It's part of a spending package that would keep the government funded through the end of the year. White House correspondent Mary Alice Parks joins me live now for more on that. Mary Alice, what is on Vice President Harris's agenda, and what is she trying to accomplish on this trip?
Yeah, Dan, clearly a significant sign of solidarity. They want to show that the White House is behind the effort from the NATO countries to protect NATO territories and also to assist in the humanitarian crisis that is growing on the borders of Ukraine. It's a big deal in a moment like this to send the vice president there, but she wants to make sure she's having face-to-face meetings with NATO allies and looking at and supporting U.S. troops and ground personnel that have been sent. We've sent a number of USAID officials, State Department officials, and U.S. troops to be helping sort of in the area, in that region. And so this is a way that the White House can show support in a very personal way.
And what exactly would this nearly $14 billion in aid do for Ukraine?
Yeah, there's a lot in this package. It's a huge number. There's money there that would be spent directly on more military equipment for Ukraine. They've been working to get military equipment across the board to Ukraine. There's a significant amount of money in there for fighting against cyber attacks, protecting against cyber attacks, both domestically, but also helping NATO allies support their cyber defenses, make sure that they're ready in the event of something like that. Money for supporting U.S. troops, like I said, that have been surged to eastern NATO countries, and a lot of money in that package for humanitarian assistance, direct aid, food assistance, shelter. USAID already on the ground doing some of that work.
Mary Alice, what are the chances of this spending bill passing Congress, and what else is in it?
Yeah, it's going to pass. That has a bipartisan support. Actually, it's interesting that the members of Congress upped the number. The White House had requested just shy of $10 billion. Congress said, we want to make sure we are showing you that you have the support you need, spend the dollars that you need. So this was a bipartisan deal that was reached. And like you said, it's a part of a larger package to keep the government funded. It's a large package, and it'll go to the president soon.
All right, Mary Alice Parks, thank you. And the United States says it's sending 2 Patriot anti-missile batteries to Poland as a defensive deployment at the request of the Polish government. The move comes after the Pentagon rejected Poland's offer to send fighter jets meant for Ukraine to a U.S. NATO airbase in Germany. Meanwhile, U.S. officials warn there will soon be just 10 to 14 days worth of food and supplies available in the Ukrainian capital of Kyiv. Let's bring in former senior Pentagon official Wendy Anderson for more on that. Wendy, thanks for being here. The CIA director, Bill Burns, testified before Congress that he thinks Vladimir Putin is angry and frustrated and will likely double down on his attacks with no regard for civilian casualties. So where did Putin go wrong with this invasion, and where do things stand now?
Diane, I'll tell you, it is the question that I think so many of us are surprised by and trying to figure out. Vladimir Putin, somewhat surprisingly to many of us who've been watching this closely, this is day 14, as you well know, has underestimated almost every single important aspect of this conflict to date. He has underestimated the Ukrainian resistance. He has underestimated the sophisticated use of information technology and social media that the Ukrainians have and have grown up with in this different generation of leadership under Vladimir Zelensky. He has profoundly underestimated his own forces, the power and the competence of his own forces, as we have seen play out day after day, really hour after hour, as ABC News Live has been reporting from the ground. And I'll tell you two other things, Diane, that I think are really worth stressing here. He has unified NATO. Now, many people have been saying that on and off for a period of days, but I want to underscore that NATO has not been this aligned and this unified, really probably since the attacks on 9/11, and on the basis of which Article 5 was invoked. The unification of NATO, the unification of the EU with American leadership, also in partnership, is something that Vladimir Putin, ironically, absolutely did not want to happen. And I will also add one last point to this, which is that he underestimated American leadership. Obviously, the United States is a very powerful member of NATO. We take our partnership in that alliance and membership in that alliance deadly seriously, as you can see. I think Vladimir Putin thought that President Biden and this administration would not be as skillful and as thoughtful about what they've introduced. And what I will use as my example is to talk about how they have quite masterfully played in the background a very dedicated and intentional longer game of introducing intelligence out into the open so that we threw, as a NATO alliance, Vladimir Putin off his game. It is rare in the last 40 to 50 years of his ascension and his leadership within Russia that he has been so publicly thrown off his game. We forced him as an alliance to rethink his war plan. And in the time that it took to do that, we were able to amass thousands and thousands of troops along NATO's Eastern Europe, Eastern flank. We were able to deliver munitions of all kinds, but particularly anti-tank javelins and anti-aircraft Stingers. As you well know, we are also in the midst of discussing with Poland and with other NATO partners how we might consider transferring aircraft that the Ukrainians have been requesting into Ukraine to give them even more air dominance than they have already established. What we know, Diane, is that what many thought would be perhaps a shorter conflict of a couple of weeks, we know that's not true. This is a conflict that will be months, if not longer.
Now, Russia is warning of a potentially dangerous scenario if Western countries use their airfields to support Ukraine. Why is, for example, sending Polish fighter jets to Ukraine so different from providing weapons like anti-tank missiles? And what more can U.S. allies do to support Ukraine without turning this into a much larger conflict?
That particular question is one that many of us have been focused on for the last week. We, as you and your viewers understand, I think what the United States needs to be doing, at least, and I'll start there, is more of what we are doing. You mentioned the javelins, you mentioned the Stingers. We have been engaged in providing those munitions now for many, many weeks. The introduction of a no-fly zone, for example, or of aircraft into contested airspace over Ukraine is something that is a bridge still too far, not only for the United States, as this administration has made clear, but also for the entire alliance. And here's why. Vladimir Putin has been very clear in saying, if there is any introduction of foreign aircraft into this space, I will see it as an escalatory move and I will respond in kind. As we have seen with Vladimir Putin, given his behavioral track record over decades, he tends to escalate when he is scared and when he is angry and when he is frustrated. And we know from the testimony of American intelligence community officials yesterday, the Director of National Intelligence, the Central Intelligence Agency head, that he is frustrated and that he is stymied by and surprised by the incompetence and the challenges that he has faced, originally thinking that he would have probably within a week or so decapitated Kiev, for example, and installed a much more Moscow-friendly puppet regime there. I think we have to be very careful to listen to him, take him at his word, and believe that if he says, if there is an introduction of aircraft, whether it's Polish aircraft from an American Air Force base or whether it's other NATO aircraft, that he will respond and that he will respond significantly. And we cannot afford to do that right now.
All right, Wendy Anderson, we appreciate your analysis, Wendy. Thank you.
Thank you.
And with new humanitarian corridors in place, civilians are now rushing to escape some of the hardest hit parts of Ukraine, and many are heading to Poland. The UN says the country has already taken in roughly 1.3 million refugees so far. Phil Lipoff has more on that from Lublin, Poland.
They are still coming, women and children, crossing the border into Poland every day. The faces of the vulnerable children continue to tell the devastating story. They are understandably scared, shy, confused, and exhausted. The difference between the first time we came here 2 weeks ago and now, the frequency of cars coming across the border is much greater. And more than 2 weeks after the Russian army invaded Ukraine, we are starting to see more elderly refugees like Larissa just across the border with her granddaughters, Genia and Anna. She tells us they stayed as long as they could, but once the house across the street blew up, they had no choice but to leave. They took only what they could carry. Larissa says she never thought this would happen. A 5-minute drive from the border, and we get to one of those reception centers set up by the government. Outside, big tents with supplies, toiletries to diapers, warm clothes, even strollers. Refugees come here for basic needs and to find shelter. This is where they're matched up with those who want to help, a ride somewhere, a place to stay. But now, concern of exploitation, even human trafficking. Under this red tent, a record now of those who are matched and where they're going. We see an aid group from Germany, these supplies heading to Ukrainian soldiers. A bus from Denmark, ready to take refugees to Warsaw. Volunteers from all over Eastern Europe are here to help. Inside, they're here and they're trying to figure out what's next. So what they can do is they can get some food, they can get the supplies they need, and then they come in here and you can see. It's not just women and children, but there are grandparents that are here. We've spoken to several sets of grandparents. Ukraine. Elderly women sitting on what they were able to carry across the border. Children playing with a toy they were given here. But any parent knows that excitement will be short-lived, as the uncertainty and the fear of being away from home, not seeing your dad, and being exhausted will soon take over again. So that woman in the story there who looked at me and said Ukraine, we spoke to her for a little bit, and her story is basically very similar to a lot of stories we're seeing of people crossing the border now. She said, I'm disabled, and I was forced to bring my grandchildren to a new country, Diane.
Phil Lipoff and Lublin, Poland. These stories are just heartbreaking. Phil, thank you. Coming up, Sherry Papini, the woman accused of faking her own abduction, runs out of jail after being released on bail. Here are the new details about her case when we come back. Welcome back. The lead investigator in the Sherry Papini case is speaking out after the California mom was granted bail last night. She's charged with faking her own abduction in 2016. We're going to talk to the sheriff in just a moment, but first, here's Kaylee Hartung with the latest.
Overnight, the California mother of two accused of faking her own kidnapping in tears as she runs out of the Sacramento County Jail into the arms of family and friends trying to shield her from the cameras. 5 days after her arrest, a judge siding with Sherry Papini's defense, releasing her on a $120,000 bond on the conditions that she surrender her passport, agree not to leave parts of California, hand over any firearms, avoid consuming drugs and alcohol, and participate in a psychiatric program. Prosecutors had argued that the 39-year-old is a flight risk who'd already proven she could run away and successfully hide from law enforcement, as she did when she disappeared for 3 weeks in 2016, citing how she allegedly branded and starved herself as evidence to the extreme lengths she would go to. In court, prosecutors alleging Papini attempted to flee when FBI agents surprised her outside her children's piano lesson to arrest her, but her defense claims she was simply trying to protect her children from what she perceived as danger. Papini's disappearance in 2016 2016, sparking a nationwide manhunt. Shasta County Sheriff's Office Investigations Captain Brian Jackson was on the case from day one, now telling ABC News exclusively about the moment he learned she'd reappeared on Thanksgiving Day.
It was close around 4 o'clock in the morning that I got a phone call. As I started to wake up, trying to figure out if I was dreaming. It was just kind of surreal. Like, what do you mean we found her? Who? And then my mind kicks in at that point. Who? What? How? Is she alive?
Found bound, branded, and bruised, her hair cut short. Papini telling authorities she was abducted and tortured by 2 Hispanic women.
She was bound with restraints, but was able to summon help from a passing motorist.
But Jackson says the leads she gave him were not helping solve the case.
As investigators, we want answers. We need something tangible to hold on to. And when you don't have that, or you're dancing around some answers that may be there, it can get very frustrating.
Now authorities allege it was all a charade. They say their more than 5-year investigation uncovering evidence that she was staying with an ex-boyfriend more than 600 miles from her home and harmed herself to support her false statements.
Getting to this day, or the day last week when Sherry Papini was arrested, it's been a long wait. I made a commitment, and I told several people that I did not want this to be a cold case when I retire someday. That's the level of commitment that I was focused on.
And Diane, Sherry Papini was seen arriving at her sister's home late last night in Chico. It's unclear if or when she'll go home to her husband and 2 kids in Redding. Now, a preliminary hearing has been set for Papini about 2 weeks from now, but if a grand jury indicts her before then, she'll go straight to trial. Diane?
All right, Kaylee Hartung, thank you. And for more on this, I'd like to bring in Sheriff and Coroner of Shasta County, California, Michael Johnson, who has been working on this case. Sheriff, thank you for being here. I just first want to get your quick reaction. Are you surprised that Sherry Papini was granted bail?
Well, I don't know if I'm surprised. That's that's not a determination of ours anymore. The court heard the testimony and considered all the factors. So maybe a little bit, but in today's day and age, not really. As long as she's held to answer, that's really our primary focus.
Now, you say you were suspicious of this case early on. What was it that first made you think something's not right?
So there's really 3 stages to this investigation, and the first was when she went missing. The first launch was all the resources to try to find her, locate her as a missing person. Second phase we went into was as suspects were developed and we got the sketches, was trying to identify who was responsible. And then it was in the third phase that really the suspicion began. Sherry Papini reappears. We have all the evidence involved with her to process. We have statements, we have interviews, we have a lot of facts to vet out. And as we started doing that portion of the investigation, that's when a lot of suspicion came to light.
And so how much can you expand on that? What was it that raised that suspicion?
Yeah, you know what? I really can't expand too much on that because those are details of the investigation that are going to be heard in the court hearing. And our federal partners are the ones who are taking the lead on this and now carrying the case through. So in order to maintain the integrity of the investigation, I really can't get into the details of that. I can tell you this, so just for clarification, I was not at this agency when this whole case developed. I was a chief at the neighboring agency in South County here, and it impacted our whole community, not just the Shasta County Sheriff's Office, not just the micro Redding community, but the Shasta community in totality. It really changed the way people felt and their safety and their perception of what was going on here.
Now, Papini hasn't had to enter a plea yet, but police say that there's a witness, her ex-boyfriend, who says this whole thing was a hoax. So how much do you think that will impact the case?
I think what you're going to see in the case is overwhelming amount of evidence, which points to this being a calculated deception by her and a farce to the public and a complete waste of resources and time for law enforcement. And I think as you watch that trial unfold and you see the evidence come forward and you hear the testimonies, it'll be proved beyond a reasonable doubt, for sure.
And Sheriff, we heard Kaylee saying that she left jail, went to her sister's house. It's not clear if she's going to return to her husband and her kids. So what do we know about her husband's role in all of this? Is he considered a suspect or a victim?
This is what I can tell you about that. I have compassion for her husband, for her kids, for her unsuspecting family. They were all left in the dark as well. And that is not really the scope of this investigation. It is looking to hold narcissistic behaviors by a mother who seemingly was abducted and created a big lie and misled everybody. So I want to make it clear that this is not vindication. We are not out to carry a torch against necessarily Sherry Papini, but she did commit crimes, and she did waste a lot of energy, and she did deceive a public and a nation, and she has to be held accountable for that.
Now, do you think anyone else could face charges in this case, or could Papini face additional charges?
Yeah, I actually do. I think there's a real possibility that the grand jury can issue indictments for other people. She certainly didn't pull it off by herself, and there's other people involved or knowingly harboring her and were part of her plan. So it wouldn't surprise me if other people were charged or there were other charges added to it, but I don't necessarily anticipate that.
All right, Sheriff Michael Johnson, we appreciate your time today. Thank you, sir.
Thank you.
Coming up, the news just coming in about the first person to ever receive a pig heart transplant. Stay with us. Welcome back to ABC News Live. Here are some of the day's top stories. The Florida legislature has passed the controversial measure dubbed by critics the Don't Say Gay bill. Among other things, the bill bans teachings on sexual orientation and gender identity in kindergarten through 3rd grade. Supporters say it gives parents more rights. Critics call it censorship and say it will harm children who already struggle with bullying and isolation. Republican Governor Ron DeSantis is expected to sign it into law. Hawaii is set to drop its indoor mask mandate by the end of March, making it the last state to do so. Pfizer is also launching a clinical trial of its COVID pill treatment in young children. The pill is already authorized for high-risk people ages 12 and over. This new trial will test the treatment in children as young as 6. A Maryland hospital says a man who received a pig heart transplant in a medical first has died just 2 months after that transplant. David Bennett underwent the experimental procedure in January in a last-ditch effort to save his life. At the time, he said he knew it was a shot in the dark. Doctors did not immediately release a cause of death. I'm Diane Macedo. Do stay with us as ABC News Live continues with news, context, and analysis. We'll be right back.
We still plan to celebrate these amazing beings, our closest living relatives, the chimpanzees, and in particular the chimpanzees of Gombe. What a lot they've taught us. They're still teaching us.
Hi everyone, George Stephanopoulos here. Thanks for checking out the ABC News YouTube channel. If you'd like to get more videos, show highlights, and watch live event coverage, click on the right over here to subscribe to our channel, and don't forget to download the ABC News app for breaking news alerts. Thanks for watching.